Hello and welcome to our post-budget analysis. We try and look at what this budget will do to this crisis-ridden economy. We know the economy is in the weakest shape it's been for many, many years. And normally India reacts positively when there's a crisis. Actually, we only react when there's a crisis. So does this budget recognize, first of all, that we are in a crisis, and does it have big ideas to counter that crisis? That's what we'll be looking at. Is the impact of this budget going to turn around the economy? Number one. And number two, what are the big ideas in this budget? It's been a terrible disappointment for the stock exchange. It's down nearly 750 points. That's huge, among the largest I remember for many years. But the stock exchange is not everything. There's much more to it. So is this budget a series of many, many small, detailed items, or does it also contain in it some big ideas? Let's start right here. So any big idea you see in this budget, or it's a...
I think there are a series of stuff which are there. There are small yet series of stuff. Right. And yes, there is recognition of what you exactly said as to where the economy is.
You think so?
I think in certain cases there are, and I think that's why this huge focus on rural India.
Right, the 16 points.
That's right. I think that was an important thing to do, and I think getting more money into the rural India was important. Right. There's also recognition, if you see that there is on the corporate side, I think there should be quite some reasons for people to be quite joyous, I must say, because if you really look at the taxation side, there's been quite a bit done on the besides the simplification side. There is also substantial reduction. DDT is something that one was talking about.
One thing about simplification, you have so many slabs now. Is that simplification? And then you have alternative not using those slabs or using the slabs. It's not simplification.
You have a choice. You have multiple choice from where you can pick, really. But more importantly, I think there is a recognition that we need to give money in the hands of people. So there is a lot that has been done in that regard. And of course, this entire thing about equity, not taxing equity, and DDT, say for instance, removal of that, that's a very, very important dividend distribution tax, and I think that's a very clear message. So besides rural, you see the
DDT, dividend distribution tax, people will pay more now.
Dividend distribution tax, which is now
in the hands of the people.
Yeah.
And if you're above the rate, you're going to pay more.
Exactly. So this is something which is very, very important, significant from the corporate side. If you say the rural side, the corporate side.
Actually, the good thing there is that subsidiaries to holding companies don't have to pay DDT.
Absolutely. In that case, you don't. And very importantly, again, if you really look at the third side, we were all talking about in this show, before the budget, we were talking about how the government can boost infrastructure sector. And I think there is a lot in the infrastructure side that she has done, which can pump in a lot. If, again, the key thing to watch would be implementation. I'm worried about that, and I think if that is done well, there are some very sensible things done in the budget.
It's like the cricket commentators. If you bat well and bowl well and field well, we should win the match. Right?
But
as long as we do all things well.
The statements are good. Implementation is something that we'll have to see, and that's where we get stuck.
Big idea?
I don't think there was any big idea at all. I mean, it's a series of, if it's 2.5 hours, it can't have a big idea.
Longest speech ever.
Longest speech.
Yeah. So if it's 2.5 hours, it has to have a series of small ideas. And the question is, what about the implementation? And 3.5% deficit next year after all the spend. I mean, how are you going to get it? Your industrial, they assume 6 to 6.5% next year. If that is the case, and inflation is 4%, that's 10%, 11% nominal. Again next year. You got to pay a 14% increase on GST to all the states, which you're committed to. I mean, where is the money? And the tax rebates, frankly, I know Mukesh should know better. I doubt that all the guys who got the tax rebates, they probably pay 10% of the tax. The guys above 15 lakhs pay 80-90% of the income tax. So, it is a beautifully dressed budget, a lot of little schemes, but no big idea that I see.
Also, tell us, India, we only react when there's a crisis. Otherwise, we'll limber along. But to react when there's a crisis, first you have to recognize there's a crisis. if what Dorab is saying right, there's a series of small things that it's a normal budget for a normal year and a normal economy. It's not a crisis-ridden budget.
I didn't hear a recognition, a clear, explicit recognition that we are in a crisis. I didn't hear an explicit recognition that we're at the lowest growth we've been at in the last 11 years as an economy, and that we need some immediate steps to actually foster a recovery. I think the key point would be some realism in the numbers. It's good to have a more realistic nominal growth rate being projected for next year of 10%. That is more realistic.
But I hate
even
doing
that is
nominal
tough.
growth rates because what is inflation? 5, 3, 7. I don't think it's a hell of a difference.
I agree. And as you know, much of the dispute in GDP calculations over the last 15 years has been on the difference between nominal and real. It's really been the nominal growth rates most people have agreed on. It's the real growth rate that people have disagreed about.
Talk about a trust deficit, it's in the numbers.
It's in there is that element in the real GDP growth rate numbers. I would have liked to have heard the slowdown explicitly recognized, and then things being advanced that would directly address that. I think the one big thing that I heard that I didn't hear, that I wanted to hear, was the government is a major debtor today. It owes, people say, something like 300,000 crores to private companies and to the states. And this is simply because that's the way in which it's achieving the current budget deficit. Right. I didn't hear anything around that. Now, maybe it's unreasonable to expect that.
It's a very important point you're raising. Actually, not just corporates. I mean, talk about state governments.
Exactly.
They've only just paid GST for, I think, August, September, October, and then they haven't paid, FCI hasn't paid all the dues, so state governments just don't have the cash because the center hasn't transferred that.
And I think, I think addressing that would be a fiscal stimulus like nothing else here and now, because it would immediately put liquidity into the system, but it would at the same time, because of the cash-based accounting system that we follow, raise the deficit. So I would have liked to have at least heard that dealt with in a tangible way. The finance minister did refer to it, sort of almost in a footnote. She says in one of the annexures, she says, I've listed the non-budget dues of the union government. So we'll have to see what that actually says, and does it actually bring about greater transparency in this area, which is, I think, very important for us going forward.
Mukesh Bhutani.
So, I think the point that Naushad is making, there's often been criticism that the real fiscal deficit is not getting reflected because there are off-balance sheet borrowings. So that's the annexure she was referring to. I felt that there is something for everyone in the budget. You call it please everyone philosophy or whatever, but big ideas were missing. I think dividend distribution tax and the tax amnesty, well, I won't call it amnesty, the tax dispute resolution coming on the back of a phenomenally successful indirect tax dispute resolution system that they had initiated last year is certainly a big idea. One needs to see. I often wonder, why do they give such a small window, They gave a window of March 30th.
2 months.
2020.
And also you have to pay the full amount that you're disputing anyway. You just exempted penalty and interest.
Correct. Right? Because it takes time for large taxpayers to be able to make an assessment intelligently whether it makes sense to go for the scheme or not go for the scheme.
But it's not a settlement actually.
It's not a settlement. So I think they were saying that it doesn't matter at which appellate forum the dispute is lying. So far as you bring that dispute forward, you pay the taxes, you will be exempted from interest and penalties. So if somebody has had a dispute which is 8 years, 10 years, 5 years old, if you take into consideration the interest factor, it will certainly far more.
Right. But these are not going to revive the economy. This is a normal, routine change, good change.
Correct.
And there are a lot of good changes in it. But when you've got your auto sector collapsing, when you've got housing collapsing, when you've got your NBFCs in terrible shape, they're going to not look at this budget and say, dividend distribution taxes.
There was continuation of some of the ideas. Additional withholding tax on interest for funding by FPIs and qualified foreign investors is there. They came out with another legislation which said that sovereign funds investing in infrastructure will be completely exempt from interest.
That seemed a positive,
That's a big positive. One needs to look at which segments
and how much is that really potential for that.
I think part of it has also got to do with the economic diplomacy that the government has been pursuing, which said that, okay, let's encourage sovereign funds to come to India because we are finding it a challenge to attract private investment.
So would you call this a good budget for a good economy and a bad budget for a bad economy?
I would call it a good budget because, if we got into a pre-budget discussion and we had listed 100 things to say that this is what finance minister need to do, she has tried to cover many of those points in the budget.
But chartered accountants are going to gain a lot, KPMG, because you have to tell us whether we take the new slabs or the old slabs, and my God, you got your...
not at that level, because people who are in that 5 to 7 lakh rupees will not
would be KPMG fees would be higher.
If I were to pick up two things from this budget, which was in my list of pre-budget analysis, is the 16-point initiative for the rural and agriculture economy. If implemented well, implementation is a big
But wouldn't you
question
like
mark.
to see 3 big points rather than 16 routine points?
There are a number of things to be done. So if there are 16 and 16 can be implemented, implementation is the key. The other point I would pick up is that 22,000 crore put into the infrastructure fund, which if leveraged well can generate into
I think that's the point you also raised. If it's implemented well, that is a positive.
I mean, I would have rather put 50,000 crore and leverage it to 5 lakh crore and spend 5 lakh crore on infrastructure, create jobs, more spending, and then prepare the economy for $5 trillion in few years to come. So
I think that's a good point. I mean, like 50 lakh crores, if you're really going to do something with infrastructure, it has to be more than 22 lakh crores.
I thought we were going to get a dream budget, and this was not a dream budget. And specifically for small companies, she said that there's this 5 crore thing that you don't have to be audited, but then she added that only 5% of your income can be in cash. Now that means all small retailers are out of this. I mean, 5% is a very small amount there. Secondly, all small businesses are not companies. They are partnerships or proprietorships, etc., etc. They've got no tax break. I mean, they're going to pay 30 plus 10 plus 4, whatever it is. So the largest segment of employers don't benefit from your corporate tax thing.
Right. Such a jolly DMD lawyers. You're looking very happy.
Well, like you said, couple of things which will give us some kind of work is figuring out which tax slab to take now. But having said that, I think the budget flattered to deceive on a lot of fronts. There was a lot of good noise on one of the key, key demands from the industry of contract enforcement. She mentioned it and then said we'll come out with some scheme. So nothing concrete in the budget. I think that's something which people are looking at certainty on how contracts will be enforced. Secondly, again, announcements made on setting up an investment clearance cell on the lines of, I think, the FIPB. Again, an announcement made, nothing concrete. Again, it may be a rebundled FIPB, we don't know. Similarly, on putting a citizens charter in the Income Tax Act for enforcement, nothing concrete. They'll say something will be notified. So I think a lot of right noises, but nothing concrete as I would look at and feel happy about. The only thing which excited me from an investor perspective was the abolition of dividend distribution tax. But what I would have also liked to see, along with that abolition, is clarity on how you will tax the recipients of the dividend.
Today, would it just be added to your income?
Well, a lot of foreign investors come through treaty countries. How will you address that? Now,
foreign investors.
Because earlier also we had this problem. The problem was this dividend distribution tax was also brought in as an alternative to the earlier regime. We've now reverted to the earlier regime. And we brought in dividend distribution tax addressing a problem. Now we are back to that same problem. So I don't know maybe that clarity.
So you get so much dividends in crores. How is this going to affect?
But you know, it's great for the accountants. I've got to now start keeping pieces of paper that I used to keep. Correct. And the company doesn't send me a piece of paper. I run out of the company. My question is, all the dividends are now paid in bank accounts. Why can't the government figure out how much I've got and send me a bill? Yeah. They are going to send me forms that are filled in, right? Why can't they put their amount in my...
I have a feeling they may have a withholding tax on the dividend distribution.
No, let them know whatever tax they want. All I'm saying is that why do I have to run after these bits of paper? You send me a bill of how much dividend I've got, because my bank statement is so sometimes unclear. Yeah. I don't know what it is. It's, we've been through that. It's a terrible... I'm sorry, can I just make one more point? This is a point I made in the 2014 budget. Agricultural income doubling in 5 years. Since the year 1900, at least that I remember, no country that has a developed agriculture has ever been able to double. That's 15% per annum. Agriculture since, I think, millennium, since the economic advisor yesterday talking the year 1, I think since the year 1, nobody's doubled agricultural income in 5 years.
Agricultural income grows at maximum 3 to 4%.
It's grown at 2.5% in the last 2 years.
To say this doubling in 2022 is absolutely
the last 2 years
ridiculous.
data says 2.5%.
They wanted 15%. Now it has to grow at about 20%. It is the most ridiculous figure. Tata Steel, I noticed the share price was down.
Yes.
Why?
A bit surprising because, given the focus
it's already gone so far low.
Infrastructure, going to focus on infrastructure.
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of focus on infrastructure. I think one positive thing is over the last few years, the share of capital expenditure and the total expenditure has been reducing. I think the minister said that it's being increased by some 22%. Secondly, the focus on oil and gas, the focus on water conveyance systems, focus on ports and many other things. I thought there was a fair amount for infrastructure, which is steel intensive. So, but I can see that all steel prices, share prices have dropped. So, I don't know.
So overall, apart from Tata Steel, your view?
So, I think the positives are the fact that they're carrying forward what they said on infrastructure. Now, the implementation is key, but at least there's no change of tack there. I think there's a recognition that's very important. I think that ensures that money flows to sections of society who are semi-urban, rural, semi-skilled, because I think that's a big problem, right? And it's a way of making sure that it triggers some consumption in rural areas. I think the focus on agriculture, again, shows a rural focus. Some work for MSMEs, again, that's a big problem area today for the MSME sector. So I think there are some attempts, there is a focus, could have been bigger, but there's certainly a focus. So I feel that some of it will probably be evident in the detail because it was a long speech, but I think some relevant detail was not there. And we look
more detail you want?
Relevant detail.
From the BJP point of view.
Well, I've just heard all of them. I agree on two things. There's not much of details are available because this is again a budget speech with a lot of annexures.
Always, yes.
But I will just make a caption that we have come with the people's mandate. And this is the people's budget, basically. See, till yesterday, we are all discussing and debating on 3 points. Number 1 is the GDP. Number 2 is a deficit in, all these expenditures, income deficits and all. And third, we are talking about the slowdown. Right. Now, this is the budget, what we have, just from the beginning, I'm just listing the budgets. Every sector have been addressed. If you talk about the corporates, if you talk about the individual tax, if you talk about the MSME, if you talk about the agriculture, there is no sector left which is not been touched. Now the question is that what is the government's entire objective? Right. The objective is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Biswas. The third is very important. Now, I can go one by one. There is 3 points which has been objective of the entire budget, which is the aspirational India, economic development for all, and caring society. What we are missing today is that the development, if we go to the Western world, development without caring. So the caring is an integral part of the Indian society, which has already been taken care of here. Now in agriculture, there are 16-point programs are there. As one of the panelists was talking about.
Sir, just sorry to interrupt. Yeah. One big idea that you feel will make this economy now grow fast.
I'm telling you this.
Yeah, just give us one idea.
I'm just one-liner. I'm not explaining much technical details. there's a 4 engines of the economy. So basically 4 engines of the economy.
Right.
All 4 engines have been given the entire directions, fuel, and the possible, visionary indexes that where we should reach. For example, I'm giving one more example. Our borrowings, external borrowings, net market borrowings have been 5.36 lakhs. Fiscal deficit is about 3.5 from 3.8. It was 3.8 last year.
Yeah.
Now, from that, in order to match all these things, now there is a huge infrastructure investments.
So can
now
I just interrupt you on that point?
They're all interlinked, and you see this is a very comprehensive thought process have been employed so that one should complement another one. If you talk about the infrastructure spending, that will also help it to grow the private sector,
But
the manufacturing
there's no
sector.
major change in infrastructure, 22,000 crores.
No,
This is
there is a
one
clear
time.
guideline. Prannoy, there is a
Wouldn't
clear
you say-
guideline. The infrastructure in terms of the oil pipelines, infrastructure in terms of the growth of the infrastructure, roads and ports, and infrastructure in the digital infrastructure, which is very important. Optical fiber will be given to 1 lakh villages. Today, what we are talking about, the digital age. Now, in digital age, you need both hardware and software.
Yeah.
Now, we are lacking of the investors or the investment in the hardware sector. There is optical fiber layout and the switching systems and all. Sorry. So that has been well directed from where the money will come. Now the FDI, I'll give you a figure.
No, sir, just one sec.
Yeah.
Take what happened just to show you the level of the crisis. Corporate tax was meant to go up 15% in the last budget, from the last budget. It went down 15%. That's a swing of 30%. That's 2 lakh crores. What is here that will make us feel that's not going to happen again? I mean, when you got a minus 15% corporate tax, that is worrying.
Absolutely. Now, I give an answer to this. There's also an answer in this entire speech. One side, the GST collection, yesterday there was an economic reports, and the GST collection for January has crossed 1 lakh crore marks, right?
But that's not much to be thrilled
No,
about.
I'm coming back to this. Why it was not been,
Sub 3%.
Why? The reason because of the GST, all this process of the GST collections and the refunds and all.
Transitions.
So therefore, we are going to into digitized GST forms. That is, you have to be online, and even the refund could be much more easier. What agony was that the refund is not coming on time. So everything have been addressed in the budget on a very specific way. So I am really was quite surprised.
Optimistic by nature.
Absolute optimistic, and it is achievable. It is achievable. Today we are talking about the nominal GDP, right? So if you deduct that, so we are coming into 6.5. Whatever is the World Bank, whatever is the other, institution talking about.
No, if you're
we are very
10%
close to
nominal
that.
and your inflation is even 4.5, you're
But
down to
again,
5.5.
Again, the
so,
component of inflations. Now, today, the moment you will inject money into infrastructure, your manufacturing growth will be there. There is a worldwide slum, so the export is restricted. But for
I just
promoting
want to,
exports,
I want to take up some point that you raised. Do you feel that given this crisis, this is the one time we could have forgotten a little bit about 3.5% deficit, let it go to 4.5 for a year, 1% increase, just push into the economy, get demand coming back, and we're sticking to like a routine look at the economy, which is in terrible crisis?
You know, I think, Prannoy, that the view the government took in this case was that the economy is now reached the bottom and it's now going to start growing again. If you look at the economic survey numbers that came out yesterday, it talked about 6 to 6.5% GDP growth for next year. So I think in their view, they've already taken a number of steps. They will
But what are the
continue to-
indications that it's hit rock bottom?
I think if you look at some of the leading indicators that are coming out now, you get the feeling, at least sequentially, that they've sort
Not
of
the
plateaued
people
off.
I talked to, it's getting worse and worse, and they were really hoping
No,
for something.
I don't think
Give
that
me
is-
some
yeah.
example. I know
No, I
your
think
renewable energy.
Yeah, no, I think GST, for example, is one thing. There was, there was a drop-off for about 3-4 months into October. Then after that, we've been collecting a
You know, the
lakh
increase in
crores plus.
GST is 3%. Nominal. That's
Okay.
not good.
No,
That
I
is
agree with
terrible.
that. I agree with that, but I think if you look at some of the other numbers as well, if you look at power sector growth, for example, that had sort of fallen off. Now it's sort of plateaued off again. So all I'm saying is that I'm trying to analyze what the view
Yeah.
of the government is. what their mindset might have been leading into the budget. And I think therefore their sense is, let's not press the panic button. And they've taken a view, as you know, there were two schools of thought, whether in fact there should be a, whether this budget should be expansionary or not from a fiscal standpoint, or whether they should hew to fiscal prudence. And I think they've taken the view that they'd rather do the latter. You can't fault them beyond a point for that. I think, that will mean that borrowings will be less. Hopefully the pressure on interest rates is not that high. So I think they've chosen to go down that path.
Fair enough.
So I think that is their point of view, basically.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
It seems as though it's a budget that made a lot of announcements. My worry is really two things. One is that how of what all has been announced has not been detailed, so we'll have to wait for that. It's also likely to take time. And therefore, are we going to see enough recovery from this sentiment that is already, like you said, is pretty bad in the country? We'll have to wait and watch.
Will sentiment change? Will this budget change sentiment?
Not immediately.
Not immediately.
Because the how of it
will this
is
budget
not clear.
change sentiment?
No, I don't think that it would.
Will it change sentiment?
Remarkably change sentiment.
Not.
Yeah.
Will it change sentiment, Mukesh? I'm not talking about your sentiment because there's a lot of complications. You're looking very happy, as he always does.
No, it would be premature to make that comment until somebody reads the fine print.
But that is the last resort of any scoundrel.
Or accountant.
Or accountant.
But based on plain reading, since there are no big ideas, I don't see an immediate positive change. I would still discount what happened in the market today because the market had factored that the government will take away long-term capital gains tax. And that is the primary reason for what you saw the reaction to the market.
Market's not everything.
I wonder if they had not done anything to dividend distribution tax, how the market would have reacted more negatively.
Yeah, that's true. From the Congress point of view, I know one of the things you do believe in, which the Nobel Prize winner Abhijit Banerjee also believes in, that is, instead of giving tax cuts, put money in the hands of the poor, because they spent. The tax cuts, the amount that's spent actually and the amount that's saved doesn't really boost the economy that much. Could this have been no tax cuts, give money for once to the poor directly, increase that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at one level we should be grateful there aren't any big ideas because we've had experience of this government's previous big ideas.
That's going a bit far,
right.
I think.
No, in the sense that you look
we
at...
have implemented the big ideas. I can give a numerous examples of that.
No, but let me finish. I mean, of course, there's demonetization, but more recently there's PM Kisan, which was a big idea, but has serious implementation issues because very difficult to identify who a farmer is with any reliability. We had the corporate tax cut that put about 1.5 lakh crore worth of tax cuts into corporates' hands, but as we know, rather than
I do want to say 1.5 lakh crore into corporates' hand, and the PM's Kisan's fund is 0.7 lakh crore.
Yeah, so these are big ideas.
No, I'm saying it's half the corporate tax.
Oh,
I mean, you could have put much more.
But it's targeted.
You're also doing a lot of changes in the tax structure, as well as the FDI, the investment.
No, what I'm saying, instead of tax structure,
you're creating a pro-investment environment. So whatever losses you have been suffering on account of tax cut will be compensated 3 times more the investment comes over there.
That's the point.
Let him carry on. Let him carry on. You just
the point I was making.
So that is the right way to create.
Okay, we're not having a debate here. That's a different channel.
The point I was.
Let him speak, and then we'll come back to you.
The point I was making that you had a big tax cut, but it's not going to capex. It's going into getting rid of bad debts, into deleveraging. And I'd be happy if the corporates here told us if they had specific capex plans. But rationally, these companies are using these tax revenues to pay down their debt. So that multiplier effect isn't happening. So as you said, I think a targeted focus at the bottom of the pyramid would have been much better. And there are vehicles to do that. There's MGNREGA. Okay. You could have raised the wage rate. There are other, the Nyay scheme, some variation thereof could have been done. But instead, we've had these tax tinkerings, which clearly the markets don't seem to be impressed with and won't really move the needle.
I'm not terribly worried about the markets, because markets are irrational. We're just worried about really the economy. And yeah, you'd expect a budget to affect the markets, but the key problem we are facing today, and we've got Nirmala Kidwai, We've got a situation where the Indian economy is really, really in a crisis. Will sentiment change? Will that come back because of this budget?
So, Prannoy, my biggest worry is that the main income generation appears to be on disinvestment and, dare I say, privatization, where the figure has doubled for this year. And we know what the track record has been last year. Now, LIC is a big announcement on the IPO and hopefully easier to achieve than some of the strategic stake sales that were announced. So the vulnerability right now on maintaining a fisc at, or I should say, on maintaining it at the rate as announced, the 3.8 and then the 3.5, is absolutely around this disinvestment number. And what skews the arithmetic completely would be execution on this number. And that is scary because at the end of the day, it's not easy to do these and to do it in the current regime where a bunch of bureaucrats and ministries have to sign off on these is clearly, to my mind, not feasible. So I would have liked to hear more about the structure and the execution of how this is going to happen, because it takes brave souls to sign off on some of these large sales and to make sure that they happen on time. Just in terms of sentiment, I think there was a certain amount factored in. So again, markets tend to be based on expectation. So I wouldn't worry too much on that. I mean, dividend distribution tax came, capital gains tax didn't, some tinkering at the personal tax rate, which I think is important because it does at least generate some amount of consumption and demand in the hands of people. And the structures are not towards savings instruments. They, I think, would go into consumption and demand. So that is important again. But what I have not had a chance to see is while the outlay on agriculture looks large, how does it compare with last year? And if it's actually down, as I saw a particular analysis which suggests it may actually have gone down vis-a-vis last year, what are we applauding? And where is it that the allocations are actually going up? I would just say that I had a big hope on infrastructure, and I'm glad to see that focus remains. Sovereign wealth funds are very important in terms of investing in infrastructure, but I would have liked to have seen SOPs for all investment in infrastructure. It can come from capital markets, it can come from sovereign wealth funds, it can come from individual private sector players. So a big drive towards infrastructure beyond the sovereign funds would have been welcome. But it is an ambitious target and the right target to kickstart the economy. I would just say that for the PM Kisan Yojana scheme, wherever these announcements have happened, can the money be released at the start so that we see the full influence in the year rather than it being piecemeal through the year? I worry also about past dues which have not been paid, and how much of this collection that happens up front goes towards settling past dues, which is important. Because I understand there were outstandings towards MREGA and other schemes which are still pending. So kickstarting the economy has to be about releasing money into the system and releasing it quickly, because there is a lack of liquidity and indeed even a trust deficit for schemes which have not been honored.
That's right, yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if it does enough on that front. Just thanks very much, Nana, we'll come back to you. Tell us, Anshuman, are you feeling happy and everything's going to change?
I think early...
Were you happy anyway?
No, generally happy, but the fact is that, of course, more needs to be done. The budget today, I think was the first time there were a lot of things which are not detailed out. So it's very difficult to comment, but it did cover many areas, infrastructure being there. There was talk about 5 new smart cities. My question was, there was 100 smart cities earlier.
What about them?
Absolutely.
I mean, look at them. Exactly.
So that was one.
Yeah.
But, things
That's
like...
not a big idea. Would you say 2 big ideas? One is LIC privatization, well, not privatization, stake sale, certain amount on the stock market, not anybody taking it over. It's a reasonably big idea because LIC, I think the whole opposition was up and how can you touch LIC? Well, why not? And secondly, sovereign wealth funds being tax exempt from when they invest in infrastructure. These are two fairly big ideas.
I think the sovereign wealth fund one is which really made me smile because it's, sovereign wealth funds are sitting on trillions of dollars. Be it GIC of Singapore, be ADIA of Abu Dhabi, be it the Norwegians, their sovereign wealth fund is I think $1 trillion or something. And if we can tap into them, they are sitting on that money where they get a return. I'm not an expert in this, but I think they must be getting 3-4% return, if not less. And a lot of the money sits on treasury, US treasury bonds where they don't get anything. In India, of course, there's risk, but they can get a higher return. And we can, if we really tap into them, we can get a lot of money. I think that was a very big idea. Somehow it's not fully understood. Yeah. And it said infrastructure, and I'm hoping affordable housing is part of infrastructure, so even the housing sector can go after.
You hear affordable housing every year.
Yep, that's true.
Mr. Mehra, how is it going to affect you personally and the economy, the micro and the macro? Tell us.
Well, I mean, if you want an economy to go, my sense is you need industries to sort of start firing.
Yeah.
While we talk about, of course, disinvestments and so on and so forth, you have to step back and just ask yourself, if of your industries that you have, and especially gems and jewelry, which is where I belong, are you actually taking a focus and saying, let's get going?
How much are you suffering over the last year? I mean, no, I don't want your personal problems.
Not personal problems at all.
Industry.
Well, I mean, that's actually not a good statement, actually, by itself.
Okay.
Because this government is the first government to actually have thought of a gold policy, which was announced a year or two ago.
No, I just wanted to know in terms of the sector.
Yeah, well, the sector is a 6.5 lakh crore sector, 90 to 95% MSME, 7% GDP, 16% merchandise exports. We're a great contribution to the country.
Absolutely.
But no one's taken a focused view saying, look, let's just take a look at the sector and say, what can we actually do to sort it?
Yeah.
Niti Aayog actually released a report on this sector specifically. It's a manual which basically lays down where are we, where do we need to go, how do we get there,
steps.
with international benchmarking on it.
And none of that here?
Unfortunately, we did get a bullion exchange. There's a bullion exchange.
Yes,
Again, we need to go back to the fine print to see whether it's on the international or the domestic side. But that's not enough. There was a huge aspiration.
I mean, if you got all the steps written out, one could have incorporated it for this sector. What is the degrowth or growth in your sector as a whole?
The high import duty.
No, I mean, what's the percent? How much down or up is it in the last year, roughly?
It's, I mean, if we take a look at the gold imports, I think gold imports have come down by maybe 5 or 7 or 9% or something like that.
And your sales?
Not
it would be generally.
It would be sort of in sync with that, wouldn't it? But you see what on the other side, what you've done.
You're doing very well, minus 5%.
No, but then, arguably. But on the other side, what you have is with an increase in the customs duty. What's happened is that you've sort of given a huge impetus to the unofficial sector. You've actually had a state where there was a point in time when gold was actually selling on a discount in the market, domestic market. So you need to take a holistic view of this industry to say, where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we want to get there?
And as you said, Niti Aayog's got some,
it's given out that report.
That's a good report, you find?
It's an excellent report. The buy-in and the people that were in this report, the participants of this report are RBI, SEBI,
well, I really
industry.
feel, actually, I think Dorab also, and Baj also says that these kind of things, we don't need to wait for a budget to do it. We just do it next month. Just do it month after next. If there are these policies are good and available, why wait for this annual, slightly obsolete concept of wait for the budget?
I would say is that, I mean, and in line with what you're saying right now, take a small example. I cannot sell a pair of gold earrings where the value addition may be 30 or 35% on the internet at the international gold price. It's just, we don't have a system to do that.
That's crazy.
The Niti Aayog report tells you how to do it. So you talk about increasing exports. You talk about increasing value addition. It's there. Someone just has to pick it up and say, well, let's apply it.
So you're going to be on Amazon once this Niti Aayog thing happens?
I'm on Amazon, but you can't buy it on the international gold rate. You'll have to buy it on the domestic rate. But
they tell you how to...
Well, it's a complete. It's a full manual.
You need to do that
How
fast.
to go, where are you today, and where do you need to get. But in the same stead, what you're also doing at the moment, unfortunately, is by not setting up the... So, for example, every industry's got a board. The report also suggests that we need a board for this industry. We need experts taking a look at this. That's not happening.
Right.
That's not happening.
High tech?
Yes.
High tech, for once, what Mr. Mehra mentioned, lack of a holistic policy. Fortunately, in our case, yes. We had a similar report done by MeitY, our ministry, the National Policy for Electronics 2019. We were very enthused with the FM's announcement regarding, one, that there is an acknowledgement of not just electronics, technology as a whole playing a major role in the way the economy is going to shape up. So whether it's quantum...
Oh, you like just being recognized. Nothing's being done
for the moment. Yes. So I was just coming to that. Now the fine print is how much money is allocated to this under that scheme, and that's a little bit of a worry. Till we see that number, we don't know that number as yet. As she said, it's a work in process. But we are very, very happy that the government is big. So for example, there is a big switch. See, if you see the mobile phone, and that is being touted as a success, which it is to a large extent, we were always conservative, or I would say even, we didn't like the idea of a make in India happening in mobile phone, and we said it was only assemble in India. We are quite happy as an industry that at least assemble in India, even if it's 4% value addition, brings in a few jobs. And this is a supply chain driven industry. You cannot say I want the entire supply chain shifting here tomorrow. It's a process. We need to make sure that it's 4% this year, 8% next year, and 20% third year. So I think we are quite happy with it.
Congress point of view.
Well, this
then we'll have BJP, because 2 Congress and 1 BJP is not fair.
I think everyone here...
It's not a BJP, it's a country first.
All right.
Yeah, my country first too.
That's
the
spirit we are talking about.
I think it's generally true that all parties put party before country, but carry on.
If it's our country first, why do we have this kind of economic mismanagement? Why do we have this kind of denial that the economy is in deep trouble?
It's not a debate, so I'm not answering you.
After he finishes, you can. Definitely.
I'm just beginning,
you must.
You provoked me there, my friend. So the basic point is that if you look at this budget and ask whether it's doing something to reverse the trends, collapse in consumption, collapse in investment, collapse in huge deficit in terms of the government's ability to play an active role in the economy, is it going to turn around exports? I don't see any answers. And part of that is because it seems like the finance minister is in denial. The numbers that have been thrown at us, including, for example, sticking to doubling farmers' incomes by 2022, which is 2 years away, okay? And we're nowhere close to something like that. The deficit numbers that have been offered to us do not reflect how the government is actually dealing with finances. Where we talked about Manrega as one way to ensure that there's more money going into people's hands in rural India. Manrega payments are behind by many, many months. People are suffering. Who? The most
actually cash flow is a big problem.
Right. It's not just companies not being paid. It's the poorest of the poor, desperate for their next month's income, for work that they've already done, not being paid. So this sort of thing is across the board.
Almost the same as in the Congress time, right?
Oh, not at all, I'm afraid. I think you must get yourself checked. You have some memory challenges with age.
If I'm allowed,
sorry, that was just...
If I'm allowed, I'll just place 2 points or 2 indexes, which shows that where we were in 2014 and where we are right now, 2020. The central government's
but that's nothing to do with this budget.
Budget, yes. I'm everything I'm quoting from the budget speech.
Okay.
I'm not at all deviating from 0.1 inch.
Fine.
The budget says the central government debt has reduced to 47% of the GDP against 52% in 2009 to 14. That is an index which is very, 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 very meaningful index. That government debts, what every government will try to do. Why I'm talking about nation first. Right. Because every government try to reduce the debts with respect to GDP, increase the environment or create the environment for the investment, and in a personal level or corporate level, the tax cuts, so that more money is coming to this.
But sir, can I ask you, when you're in a crisis, is that the figure you should look at?
I give you one more.
I give you
one more point.
On that figure,
only 2 points. 1 point I mentioned. Another is as we talk about, we are very pessimistic about how the economic growth, this recession, or whatever it is. Right. Now, FDI was 284 billion USD, and for 2009 to 14, and which has increased, from 195 billion to 284 billion. So there's another index we're talking about. That government burden is reduced, the debt burden reduced, and the FDI is increased. So if there is not environment, FDI shows that the trust which the external investors used to have this country as a whole. We are not going to the micro details. So if the FDI increases and government debt burden reduces, that shows the efficiency of the government.
FDI in 2014-15 is higher than in 18-19, according to the economic survey.
Up to 15, it is mentioned
14-15.
195 billion.
15-16 is high, 16-17 is here, the economic survey.
284.
It's gone down since to 15-16.
No,
That's what he said.
No, I'm talking about 14-19.
Numbers until we look at the finer details, because the government has continuously played around with numbers. And what is the actual
This is not a
debt?
government number. This is numbers by the very authentic institution run by the last 50 years running in this country.
Okay, now we're going to move slightly non-political, completely unbiased, and.
First of all,
but I want you to say on air what you would say in the ad breaks also.
In the
ad breaks.
Oh, right, sure. Don't worry. So I think first of all, I think the finance minister, we should recognize, the finance minister had a really unenviable task. I mean, this was
that's very true.
She had a tough job to do in terms of dealing with
Actually,
the revenue.
on that point, a bit worried about. Can we get some news about how she's feeling, because she couldn't complete her speech. It was a bit worrying towards the end. Can we get some news on that?
She had I think she had a tough job to do, without question, given the deficit. And I think the approach could be one of the two things. It was what Sumat mentioned earlier on. One could either have taken the tack of saying, look, if you're in trouble in a company, for example, if you're in trouble, they say, do less, right? I think you could either do that, or you can try to do more. Do more generally doesn't work, right? And I think, unfortunately, we seem to have gone down that road of trying to do many things and trying to appeal to every constituency. And I think actually focusing and doing less and working on a few things would actually be more effective.
Quality rather than quantity. 16 points on agriculture. Give me 3 that were bigger.
Exactly. What I would have hope for is that, and I think it's probably the way we should see budgets going forward, is that we shouldn't see budgets as being such a big deal as we make them out to be. Many other countries have moved to a much less newsworthy budget. The US, the budget doesn't make news at all.
Right.
In
That's
the UK,
way to go. I mean,
in the UK, the budget makes much the budget makes much less news in the UK than it used
doing
to
it all the time.
Earlier on. And I think we must move to that kind of an environment where we actually look forward now from the budget and say, what are those few things that the government's going to work hard at and try and do that will actually enhance the recovery of the economy. So I think we have to hope for that. We have to really see how we can focus on doing those right things.
This should not be a once in a year thing.
That's
it should happen every few months.
Have something that comes out often. I just want to mention one thing on the corporate tax cut.
Right.
I'll tell you what we're doing as a company. We calculate. We've opted for the lower tax rate.
Right.
We calculated what the total saving in cash to us as a company was, and we said we will spend this total amount incrementally this year before the end of March, as a way of saying that, look, if we've saved so much in the way of tax this year, let's spend it all, because that was the intention.
Right.
The intention of the tax cut was to create more funds and resources with companies for investment, and if we use it in the way in which it was intended, I think it can have that kind of a multiplier effect going forward. So I think the tax cut is not just going to be used for sitting on the extra resources or reducing
but you
debt.
will only invest if you feel the economy needs it, you're going to get returns. You're not going to invest just because the government wants you to. You've got to feel the economy is reviving. Tell us a bit about the airline sector. The whole, I feel the general policy especially started in Japan. When a sector is doing badly, you help it. When an individual company is doing badly in a sector, you don't help it. Now the whole sector, airline sector, is struggling a bit.
The sector is struggling, and of course, a lot of stuff needs to be done to bring it on par with the aviation sectors around the world, many airlines with whom we increasingly compete. But a large part of that really has to do with the GST Council. So, a lot of the reform that we need really is part of the GST Council. Having said that, I think a couple of things they did do in this budget. One is, of course, the 100 new airports under UDAN. UDAN has to be one of the most successful schemes of this government. just 2 years ago, there were all these airports which were sitting around, which were never used. There were no flights going in there, no passengers going out of there. There are 50 odd airports which have been added to the aviation infrastructure in the last 2 years. So all sorts of places like, Ajmer or Porbandar or Kandla, places where there was absolutely zero flights. Flights are going now. So Udaan is a greatly successful scheme. To add 100 airports to that scheme by 2024, I think is a big plus. I think this whole Krishi Udaan, let's see what the scheme is. But we've been trying to do this, try and get some farm produce, try and send it to Hong Kong, try and send it to Dubai. If they build a scheme around that, great. I think, but in as a general direction, some of the good stuff which has happened is that I think for the first time there seems to be a sense that businessmen, when they went and talked to the Prime Minister or when they went and talked to the Finance Minister, were actually listened to. There were issues like tax terrorism,
Wasn't it true the Finance Minister wasn't many of those meetings she wasn't there?
No, but in general, when you spoke to the government, you spoke about tax
got
terrorism.
A response.
There is some response. There is something which is reflected in this budget, which shows that they were actually listening. This whole business of trying to have settlements.
They recognize that the country is in a crisis, the economy is in a crisis. Is that recognition there, or do they say you guys are exaggerating the problem?
No, I think the recognition is certainly there. I think if you're saying that nominal GDP is going to grow 10%, you're basically saying that real GDP is going to grow 5.5%. I mean, what else is this if this is not recognition?
Yeah, that's true. That's recognition.
So I think also this business of trying to encourage long-term capital, sovereign wealth funds trying to get in without tax. I think that's a good step. Pension funds trying to get in.
One other thing in the airline sector, like most disinvestments, Air India. I mean, we're waiting a year to just a small little company. Do we need Arun Shourie back to, I mean, the amount that he did under the Vajpayee regime was more than entire life of the Congress party, which is a pretty long time, and certainly much more than the current government.
Yeah.
So what's happened with Air India? It's just
I think we are one of the companies that have been spoken to on this issue. I think they are speaking to a whole host of potential investors on Air India. They have never been more serious. Prannoy, I can tell you, the formulation that they have this time, the first round flopped, that the conditions were impossible. It was doomed to failure in a sense.
Yeah.
I think this time around, they've never been more serious. They've taken debt down considerably. They are being extremely flexible, and it's just one of those really, really tough disinvestments. So hopefully it will go through.
The broader question is there's so much dependence on revenues from disinvestment, which didn't happen last year. The learning from Air India should we take these disinvestment targets, which are very high, seriously or not?
I think they are basically planning to IPO LIC. So they should get a fair amount. That's easy to do. They should get a fair amount of money from there. So the target might be realistic. IDBI, if they sell the stake in IDBI, I think that should add up to quite a bit. I don't think they're expecting to get much money out of Air India. This is a particularly sensitive and difficult one to try and do for them. But having said that, I think if you just look at the expression of interest document for Air India, it's vastly different from what it was the last time. So there seems to have been some learning in there, for sure.
Trial and error. Chalo, kuch to hai. Yeah. You're looking very pleased with yourself. We were just discussing, are there really big ideas in this budget? Does it recognize the crisis the economy is in? Has it done anything that will impact a revival and cause a revival in the economy? Big
I think
ideas.
over the last 3 to 6 months, one has seen with conversation government that there is a realization. It was not there earlier, by the way. Okay. It is very clear now. In fact, for the last few months, they've been asking for ideas on what can have an immediate impact and what is it we need to do for the long term.
Right.
And I think this budget covered some of them. Actually, it was a very vast canvas that got covered.
Right.
Many little ideas, many things which sounded like motherhood statements, but if you implement them, actually there's a pretty good salutary impact on the overall economy. What could have had direct impact of putting additional cash in farmers' hands or individuals' hands through the Manrega, that I think got constrained by the amount of money that's available. and also the amount of number of things in which it's got allocated.
But that's exactly, that's a very good point. If you if they had used this one crisis situation to do that, it could have affected demand. And you say, okay, forget 3.5% budget deficit, we'll go to 4% this year and give that money into the hands of people.
So this is an instrument which has been tried in many countries in a crisis. This excessive focus on holding onto fiscal deficit at a certain level.
Yes, exactly.
And I actually made this comment many times earlier in the last 6 months that we should allow the slippage. The only thing you have to watch out is where is that extra money being used? So it goes directly into things which are either productive, give immediate response, or is infrastructure which allows, it has a double whammy benefit. While the infrastructure projects are on, they create employment. Once they're finished, they lubricate the economy much better. They give more multiplier on the multiplier is enormous. So,
but even putting it directly into people's hands. Could have been. But this was the opportunity.
But
I think that's what America did compared to Europe, and therefore never really
America
went
also
into.
Did what I'm saying. They allowed the fiscal deficit to slip.
That's what I mean.
They spent their way out of this crisis.
Exactly.
Because growth has a magical quality. If you grow,
I thought you said Trump has a magical quality.
If you grow enough, your ability to make up for whatever you've lost over a period of time is very high. Because otherwise, the struggle continues for a long time. Fortunately, they have done many things which will encourage investment, especially from overseas. There's been more done for overseas investment by way of sovereign wealth funds getting tax breaks on actually complete exemption on investing in infrastructure and specified industries.
To all of us, I don't know, Mukesh also, that seemed to be a big idea. I'm just not aware of how big sovereign fund wealth funds investment will be. How big is it?
Well, I think it's contingent on a host of factors. One is the appetite of sovereign funds to look at the Indian markets. So the appetite today, given where the state of the economy is far less than what the appetite was, say when Mr. Modi came to power in 2014. The second is...
I think you made a point that if it should not have been only sovereign wealth funds, anybody investing in infrastructure should have been given...
That's right.
Tax break, huge tax breaks.
Yeah, so the only benefit that has continued till March 2023 is other funds that are investing in infrastructure projects, the concessional rate of withholding tax of 5%, which was legislated several years back and they keep on increasing, that is available.
Yeah, it's very small.
But the exemption for sovereign funds is an all-encompassing exemption. It covers dividends, capital gains, interest. Whereas the exemption, 5% withholding tax applies to funds only from an interest outgo standpoint.
But tell me, one is to really encourage infrastructure, but currently if you talk to people involved in infrastructure, they're not even getting paid.
So there is a problem.
Forget a tax break, get your money. And
there is a problem.
But it slows down everything.
So actually, you have to look at it from multiple perspectives. Now, from any one angle that you look at, you'll see part of the issue or part of the problem. That they're encouraging more airports to be built, planning to build more colleges, medical colleges. I think there are some super things in this budget. I've just not read the detail to understand the allocation of resources, the revenue. There is some additional borrowing being done, by the way. I think it's about 12% higher. I hope we can stay within this, because any higher would then start to make funding more expensive and also crowd out the private sector, which you can't afford right now. Because you want to encourage private sector now to get back to borrowing more and building the industry back as it was.
Anything for NBFCs? They're in terrible crisis.
So there was a little bit. They had actually made the big announcement last year. They implemented this guarantee, partial guarantee, which has just got implemented only a couple of months back.
But it hasn't really...
So she talked of pushing that. No, it should have been implemented a little bit earlier, but I think it's a useful thing to do. I think that's one front on which we could do more. Last mile funding is what is promoting consumption in the last 10 to 15 years in India. So it was these twin track which actually helps consumption, which helps capacity utilization, which then therefore brings back investment into capacity creation.
One follow-up question: are you buying Air India?
I've always said that we are too small.
You don't have to tell us.
We are too small, and this is too big a company to try and swallow for somebody as small as us.
That means you're probably going to buy it, actually. Knowing you. Tell me about Blue Star.
I am from Blue Star.
Sorry? Oh, you're Blue Star, sorry, yes.
So I'm wearing two hats. First, CI hat, I head the Agriculture Council.
Okay.
So you made a point about 16. While submitting the memorandum, we were very clear. It has to be in 3 buckets. One is to do with the reforms, which has been addressed. The APML Act or the contract forming or the land
You're going
leasing.
above my head. Probably. What do you understand? No?
Contract forming or the land leasing and the agriculture market, the APLM Act, the states must be encouraged. That was reinforced.
Right.
We have to wait and see how much they can push the
By way,
states to
these
implement.
are all very good ideas, incidentally.
Right.
Because they have a direct impact. So you still have the majority of the country depending on agriculture as primary source of income.
Yep.
So unless you're able to create more efficiency there, this challenge will be a drag on people and on the economy, both. So it is essential to figure out. So one thing they have done, by the way, is allow fallow land for solar panels, etc., which will give additional income. It's almost like a third crop is what they keep calling it.
Done it anyway.
So, no, we should do, by the way.
No, I mean, they had the fallow land, they could done it anyway. I don't know, want to...
Now a lot of, I'm into this space as well.
Into which space?
Solar and wind.
Right.
And in Karnataka, actually, instead of buying the land, I'm leasing it. So on a crop, say they were making 10,000 because there was no irrigation, they couldn't do 3 crop, an acre. So I'm giving the lease of 40,000, plus I have a revenue share because I get higher tariff for Kusum Yojana.
Right.
So the IRR which I improve, I'm willing to share. So what is happening, the farmer who was not even making any money from that land is now earning $1 lakh.
Wow.
So this actually, if you scale up, like in Gujarat, they have...
why did you need anything in the budget? You're already doing it.
No, so this was announced in the Kusum. They have allocated more budget for states to encourage. So Gujarat was doing it, Karnataka was doing it, many states were not doing it. Okay. So once you allocate more budget and supportive structure,
it'll encourage.
So say for example, in the wholesale market, you are getting a 280.
20 lakh farmer have been covered into.
And actually the other thing which they have done is this solar pumps. So this 20 lakh solar pump you give at subsidized cost, plus you are connecting them to the grid. So the game changer is you use water for 1 hour. Next 7 hours you are giving power to the grid under net metering. It's a forced policy. So the utilities are supposed to pay you.
Okay.
So that
he was
changes
just
the
saying,
income.
The second one is connected with the storage. One district level storage system. That if it is implemented, it's a needle moving thing actually. Combined with railways to be leveraged for transportation.
Right.
Coming to Blue Star, I think real estate sector is something which didn't get much in this for the hotels, hospitals or airports, malls.
Which is a pity because that's in a real problem section.
So it is disappointing. How long that industry is going to take to revive is a serious issue.
Right. We'll just take a short break and come back with more ideas of what are the positives in this budget and are they big positives and will they change, will they have an impact on our economy? That's in a moment from now. See you then. Welcome back. Well, the kind of feedback that we're getting now from these experts and industry leaders, these are people who are actually working on the ground and understand the economy much better than economists, is that while there's no real big idea, and that's a disappointment, there are lots of small ideas, and many of those small ideas are quite good. And as you know, Dorab, छोटी छोटी जल की बूंदें सागर को भर देती है.
That's the only line of Hindi you know.
Oh, should I say it in Bengali?
That would be
Tell us, Captain of Industry. We'll turn the volume off and you can be as honest as you want.
I'll be honest, whether the volume is off or on, it really doesn't matter.
First of all, let me say that I was happy to see the 3 themes which the finance minister brought about.
Right.
Aspirational India, economic development, and a caring society. Because I believe without inclusive growth and inclusive development, we really can't move up the value chain. So I think that is something which I was very happy about. Having said that, under the aspirational, I think a huge outlay on agriculture, but I'll just pick up 2 or 3 major things. And they are big bang things which I'm going to talk about. One is the solar farms on fallow lands of the farmers.
Right, we were just talking about that, yeah.
Yes. This is a recommendation we made to the Honorable Prime Minister. I was very happy to see that this has become part of the budget.
Right.
I can give you a quick data point. Farmers in Punjab, Haryana earn about lakh rupee per acre per year. When they lease land, it's about 40 to 50,000 rupees per acre. So the moment you are leasing land for the solar farm to be put up, it becomes a third crop for the farmer.
Right.
So solar is a third crop.
Just explain to me and to the viewers, why couldn't they do this earlier? What has changed in this budget to say you can use it? I mean, they could have used their fallow land and given it to a solar person anyway.
No, they could have used. In fact, as a matter of fact, there are current pilots in the country where on the...
He's doing it all the time in Karnataka.
No, but in the cultivable land also you can have solar farms. The farmer can continue to do agriculture activity below, and that land additional can give.
What's changed with this budget? Because you could do it anyway.
No, I think it is primarily because earlier it was all electricity, power being given for the electric pumps. The alternative was a solar pump, which I don't think
it's a great idea.
Which I don't think is the right thing to do on a solar pump, because you give subsidy.
Right.
It sort of gets damaged, the solar panel gets stolen, the farmer is again back on your door.
Right.
But the moment you are putting a solar farm, while the farmer will get additional income, but he also gets lower tariff rates. That's one. Right. Second, the states giving subsidy. Punjab gives 8,000 crore of subsidy to the farmers on power. It becomes zero on day one. Subsidy on solar pump becomes zero on day one. So I think this is a big thing which they talked about. The second is on the investment in warehousing, cold chain.
By the way, when you're talking about Punjab farmers and Haryana farmers, nothing yet to stop crop burning. Shouldn't there be an incentive? There are machines, there are so many methods which can stop crop burning, which is a crisis.
Yes.
Nothing.
I think she did talk about under the environment allocation for clean air, and I assume that is part of that thing.
They've allocated some more.
Sorry?
They've allocated some 40.
Yeah. There is. But having said that, again, ultimately you have to put more money in the hands of the farmer, and it cannot just be on the agri activity. That is one. Second is, until and unless private sector is brought in a big way, and that is, I think, something which is missing out for a very long time.
Yeah.
The third point is, any policy which the central government makes, the states don't act upon. Model laws on leasing of agriculture land, contract farming, so on and so forth. And I think that is something where the state governments and the national government need to sit together and move forward. And I can tell you, the moment we start seeing these things, private sector will start coming and investing. The other big thing they talked about was creating storage facilities.
Like the Congress didn't really ever believe in private sector, it's all socialist. Do you think this government also doesn't really believe in privatization and disinvestment for changing management to private sector? They just believe that we can make the government's public sector more efficient. Is that a hangover?
I would say partly true, partly not true, because if you see they are now going big time on disinvestment.
That is a statement you can make about everything.
No, I'm saying Air India, now they're saying 100% divestment.
You've got Bengali blood, because it all depends, partly true, partly not.
No, I'm a true-blooded Punjabi.
But Prannoy, look at who will touch LIC. See, like announcement
that's partly true, partly not true. Why not?
No, but just one point I want to make. The other one.
No,
the setting up of common storage facilities at the village level will give more money in the hands of the farmer, because he can store and then sell it when the prices are higher.
Yeah.
The third big point is on the blue, maritime investment which we are talking of on fisheries. We have huge coastline.
Yes.
We are probably a large exporter on fisheries, prawns and all the marine products. And this is where I think investment was required, and that I see a focus and increasing the dairy further to where we are today. if I look at the agriculture landscape,
yeah.
These are big bang things. Will it happen overnight? The answer is no, because ultimately the implementation is at the states. And I only wish that the state government start moving in this direction.
Right. Tell us about real estate.
I think I just start where Rakesh started as well. Budget had 3 elements: aspirational, caring, and in between is the economic development. I think the cultural change and the aspirational and caring part is well taken care of, because this government is really very good in the cultural change of the whole thing. Economy, I think they could have done a little bit more. And when I talk about infrastructure, we of course have an expert in infrastructure. The what part of 103 lakh crore is very clear. The how part is not very clear to me, and how it's going to be implemented and how they're going to do it. That's why probably it's taking a little time for infrastructure to take off the way it should. Real estate, housing for all, a great concept, and the government is working really well on it. I think they could have done a little bit more. This 45 lakh housing for all, I think doesn't work in many places of India, and that's one of the concerns. Secondly, I think there's no big ticket announcement for one of the biggest employers in the country, which is real estate. And
so you think real estate is not going to bounce back?
We have already announced affordable housing, and government is heavily subsidizing in terms of the tax, in terms of promoting that, because what we don't need skyscrapers or the penthouse. We need more for affordable housing.
Absolutely.
See, I mentioned that it is the budget for the people. So the people who need
affordable housing, I think I've heard in every budget for the last 20 years, just doesn't get translated. I think he's talking about how much gets translated, implementation.
Yeah, the difference between the last budget and this budget, affordable housing, we have created the space for the private players, and we have given incentive to them in terms of tax, in terms of their proportionate representation. That was not there before.
Yeah.
So now that we have taken a lesson that only affordable housing policy is not good enough. Let the private player also participate, giving them tax incentive and more room to play. That we have given this time.
No, that's my point. So there are a lot of steps taken towards affordable housing, and it's a very good concept. The whole thing, everybody gets a house by 2022, and that's a cultural change and a psychological change in India, that everybody should have a house. But I think a little bit more could have been done for private participation. So this
25,000 crore funds have been created for the real estate, where we are participating 50% and balance 50%.
I must say, after traveling, by the way, the Sensex is down 845 points right now. That's a huge
That's a different mechanism. I can also explain to you what mechanism that is, right?
I've been traveling all across India, and I have not seen affordable housing a success anywhere except perhaps Telangana, where they really are building affordable housing as one of their major, and you should learn from that.
No, in Maharashtra also, they are also
nothing like Telangana, really. They're really doing well.
So can I just add to this? Ultimately, affordable housing has to come where the clusters are, where the employment is. The problem is, on a prime land, you can't put affordable housing. So for affordable housing, you go outside the city limits to build. The person has to travel. He's not interested in buying that house. So there are practical challenges.
But no, see, in case of Mumbai, there's a prime land where the jhuggi bastis are there, right? If you convert them into affordable housing, like for mega city, they need 400 acre of land. And part of the land, if you go for affordable housing, then you get a lot of incentive.
But there you'll get skyscrapers, sir.
No, we get a lot of incentives. We're giving a lot of incentives in a mega city if you have
I'll just come to another whole area, because this is a very crucial, of course, real estate.
Sorry, just want to make one point.
Is it going to bounce back, the real estate sector? Yes or no?
I think it will take a little time, because there's no big announcement as yet, and it's important for the GDP.
Little time, we don't have time.
We don't have time. The residential part will take time, in my view. The real estate, not the affordable part, but the commercial is already doing well. Because I think
residential is in a crisis.
A lot of investments.
Nothing for that here.
But sir, there's a lot of reasons
One second, sir. Well, let them speak.
So from a residential point of view, this 2 lakh slab, the interest, I think that could have been probably done a little bit better, because people have to get the
bottom line is nothing in this budget for residential housing, which is in a crisis. Is that right?
At the moment, doesn't look
like it.
Yeah,
but for affordable housing, good, and commercial anyway is not so bad.
Commercial is doing well.
Now, based in San Francisco, venture capitalist, India is the place for you now?
It's a massive buying opportunity for me. and I'm delighted that everybody is very nervous and somewhat depressed in India.
You're getting a low price.
I'm getting everything at very, very low prices. And I think I'm also creating a bit of a tsunami in the Silicon Valley to bring other investors into India, because this really is such a massive buying opportunity. Because in India, nobody realizes right now that it's a rocket ship. And if you look at the global demand for talent, and for especially for tech talent, the demand is outside India, and the supply is all in India. This is such a massive opportunity for India to really create this, and increase the size of its pie from wherever we are right now to not just 5 trillion, but 15 trillion, if only we could globalize, if only we could invest in our people to become truly global.
But isn't the best thing, and it doesn't matter which government, best thing for tech is the government stays out of it. I mean, look at Infosys, Wipro, they all boom because no government involvement.
Yes, it is crucial that government not be involved in anything related to tech or even startup world. The creation of a startup ecosystem by the government is an oxymoron. When we hear about this in Silicon Valley, we get a bit nervous, because we've never seen, in America, you've never seen, a government coming anywhere near us in Silicon Valley. And in India, whatever is growing is because it has bypassed government channels right now. And
that's a very important statement, actually. And so you don't look at budgets at all.
I mean, for me, the budget is irrelevant, because India is just such a gold mine right now for me, personally.
That's wonderful to hear.
The only thing that I'm worried about, though, Prannoy, is this 25 or 28% tax that the government is proposing on privately held companies. That is scary, because privately held companies, their paper valuation goes up. And if we are taxed for increased paper valuation without liquidity, a startup could go belly up. Even at $1 billion in valuation, it could go belly up. Now, if I've already paid the taxes on that, I'm not going to get my money back from the Indian government. And so that is something that is making me nervous, but I plan to lobby the government for that. And I think the government is very bullish on Indian startups. They want to make us and keep us happy. I think this tax will be something that is negotiable.
So you find a responsive government in terms of trying to push startups. She did mention it quite a lot in the speech also.
Very much so, and this is a government, this is the best government we've had on being startup friendly, on being tech friendly. It doesn't know exactly how to do it, because it outsources some of its work to, to the bureaucracy, which has never done a startup before. So that is again something we need to, I'm trying to see if we can get the PM's office to think more about luring in founders of Flipkart or Paytm or, Myntra or something to be the core, sort of the trustee, the board that manages the allocation of funding. One of the things I mentioned to Niti Aayog is that we should not spend a penny more on Indian incubators, because those are dead buildings now. We should be spending on sending our founders to global marketplaces like Consumer Electronics Show or the Barcelona Mobile Congress. That's where, you see, the thing is, the trick right now, the biggest thing right now for us in India is to bring the money in. We need to get the money in from outside. Outside economy is this big.
Let me ask you now. Sensex nearly 1,000 points down now, 990. Why is that happening?
I have never understood the Sensex, so I can't reply. Nor I am listed, nor I too much buy shares.
I don't think anybody has an idea.
It is for me as difficult to understand as much as the races, so I never understood it.
No, do you feel yourself personally 990 points down, or are you feeling 990 points up?
I was looking at it, I thought it would be same or slightly up. I was surprised that it is down, honestly speaking. Yeah. Because especially I was looking at it because after DDT has been, the dividend distribution tax has been abolished, I thought this would be a big single step.
No, but Mr. Kambata, in your experience, is this budget going to change things? Are they going to improve things, or it's like business as usual?
See, on the agri side, Rakesh did mention, so what I would just like to say that the very fact that now the contract farming will have to be sort of mandated by the state. They have said they will disincentivize if they don't do contract farming. The act, whatever they call, there is a code which they have brought in. So in an extent, I somehow believe that the middleman was getting all the fun.
Just hit 1,000 points.
So I somehow believe that in food processing, I'll see that the more industrialists will directly work with the farmers if the proper contract farming policy is in place, so that we will get access to crops at a good price. And I definitely think it will also help the farmer himself to realize a better price. Not only that, he can directly sell to the retailer also. Similarly, they have said that the market reforms will be there. So APMC there has to be appended. So these are the good things. For fisheries, a lot of things have been announced, and I believe a lot of people are moving to white meat. So that is good. Overall, I believe that the FM used the word confidence building, and we as industrialists, as wealth creators, many times. And I think we are wanting to hear that, because this tax terrorism is something which every media is talking about. So that a little bit made a lot of people nervous. So I think she did a good job by saying, no, don't be nervous, we are with you, and we are going to have a charter to protect all your legitimate interests. If you are doing the right thing, nobody will touch you. And as ease of doing business, decriminalization, a lot of laws which are there, I think, which also CI has been saying a lot of times, that there is no point, you know, and in the morning in this studio, NDTV, I did say that for small petty things, the whole directors have to go to a small town and face charges. So that is not needed. And so I somehow believe that if actually there are almost 100 laws which need to be amended, abolished, or at least decriminalized. So if that actually happens, we don't know the details, it will definitely, you know, what I call really give the boost. Enforcing contract, India is doing very badly. See, trade across barriers on the EODB parameters, we have done good. Enforcing contracts between B2B businessmen, B2 government also is doing very badly. So I think she did announce that they will be looking at enforcing contracts in a major way.
Yeah,
so these are the positive things, so to speak.
Yeah, very much.
But one thing I think a lot of people have not noticed is that what they have said is for exporters, there will be a duty remission scheme. Because that is one recommendation which we had especially given is.
Do you think there was enough for exporters in this budget? Because I think, Dora, you were saying nothing much for exporters.
Exports are down actually. Merchandise exports are actually down.
No, was there enough for exporters?
No, but this scheme is very good. I was just going to say that. Because what they are saying, electric duty, which actually you don't get a refund back. If you are exporter, suppose I am exporting frozen juice.
Right.
Now, the electricity is the major raw material. So electric duty is my major input. I don't get a credit also. So if that is refunded back in some form, or the fuel, on the transportation, there are a lot of fuel we use. On that is tax, which we don't get back. So I think this itself is around 2-3%. We did calculate, so this is not a small amount on exports. So you get it back is good.
Yeah, the other thing was the earlier MEIS scheme which was there. I think that was not seen to be as WTO compliant. MEIS for exporters, that was not seen to be WTO compliant. I mean, there were some issues that were there.
Right.
So that's why they've introduced this. So in a way, it's more beneficial and it's sort of more compliant with the.
So you're going to see a turnaround in exports?
I don't think budgets will, cause turnarounds. I think it's a gradual process. If I look at the budget, I think they've captured a lot. If you see the budget, a lot of reforms that have happened over the last 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and they've added a little bit to that through this thing. I would say for me the disinvestment piece, and I know I've heard a little bit. I think you're quite skeptical about that, but I would say the disinvestment piece, is the number is very large. I think it's almost 2 lakh crores in disinvestment, privatization, and everything. I think that's the.
No, the number, as long as it's not one public sector buying another public sector shares.
No, actually, if you see, they've brought in BPCL, Concor, Air India. They're talking of listing of LIC and others. I think the key question is, how are you able to execute that in today's environment? To execute some of this versus, earlier, I think it's more challenging. So if they can execute that, I think that's a big thing. I think there's a lot of incentives in this budget.
So you think there will be privatization to the extent of 2 lakh crores? You think that will happen?
I think the pipeline is there.
Will it happen?
No, who knows it will happen or not, but pipeline is there. They've identified the assets. I think they've not, the Air India is a tough one, but I think the other assets that they've identified seem to be, so if the question is, what's the interest in these assets? Are they able to get buyers? Questions. Are they able to? What's the opposition that will be there to some of this stuff? So I think a lot of it depends on all that. Yeah. But I think this is probably, if you look at, sort of post, during 2001, 2002. After that, I think this is probably the most aggressive disinvestment target that's been set, and also probably from a overall intent standpoint.
But if you look at the last 6 years of this government, they've nationalized more industries than any other government.
No, I'm saying
and they've done the least amount of privatization. I mean, Vajpayee's government did the most, actually.
Yeah.
But this government seems to have the Congress socialist belief that privatization is terrible for this country. Oh, sorry.
Well, you know,
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice your thing.
I've been here and I actually...
in saffron, too.
I've said it. I was merely matching Nirmala Sitharaman, sorry. No, the fact is I did say in my budget speech last year that you'll never meet these privatization targets because you haven't met any for the previous 5 years. Yeah. Every year they project an amount, presumably to make their notional fiscal deficit look better. But in fact, they end up with not even a fraction of that. Actually.
But you say you're never, as a Congress person, you're never going to make these privatization targets. Thank goodness, because we are socialists, right?
Well, listen, let's leave all that out of it, because within the Congress party, we're a big tent. There are various views, and I'm certainly very much in favor of privatizing loss-making enterprises, public sector enterprises. But that's a personal view, and I don't think I'm here as a spokesman of any party anyway. I'm just making the point that you're right, privatization will not be met. I also made the point that their revenue projections were totally unrealistic, and I'm pleased to say I told you so, because they were completely off on how much revenue they're going to make. Their projections were unrealistic, and every single year of the BJP government, they've missed their fiscal deficit targets, every year. So one thing that one could hope for is a certain
3.8 is not bad at a time like this. 3.8
if it actually happens. To begin with, the numbers we've seen so far.
I'm talking about last year's 3.8. It's already happened. They're saying 3.5 for next year.
No, last year's 3.8, for example, is only central government's fiscal deficit.
Yeah, but that's not
there
bad.
Are borrowings from various other parts of the government, state governments, public sector institutions, and so on, which if added will push the real deficit up well above 4.5. But let's leave that aside. The point is that so far the world has admired and applauded fiscal restraint. That's going to be more difficult now when you have always exceeded. So you project 3.3, you end up at 3.8. You're projecting 3.8 this year. What you're going to end up with?
3.5 this year.
No, 3.5. But she did say 3.8 realistically in one sentence in that speech.
3.8 this year, 3.5 next year.
That's right. Yeah. So you can be sure she's going to exceed that too.
Well, I would say that very well articulated for a medium to long term. But what one would expect from a budget is what's going to happen the next year.
The trouble is, long term, as Keynes said, we're all dead.
The reality is that, but I would say you'll have to look at also the current condition that we're passing through. I don't think there is any availability of resources within the reach of the government to commit big bang announcements at this point of time. So she had to possibly talk about a number of things leading to a speech of 2 hours 45 minutes.
Which she did well. I mean, they were all articulated very well.
So that's why it's mentioned about the kind of thing which
but no big bang idea, you feel?
Nothing on this one. But however, for the industry to talk about dividend distribution tax being abolished is a good thing. At least, I mean, money is going to remain with the company, or when you're going to give it...
But I'm amazed, Sensex down 1,000 points.
Sensex is more speculative and sentiments at this point
compared to expectations.
They were expecting something big to happen, didn't happen, so it will come back.
Long-term capital gains tax didn't happen.
Wait for a weekend, I'm sure it will come back normalcy. But other side, I should say, is that all of us are complaining that consumption in the country has come down. And because of which capacity utilization is not picking up, so nobody is investing in the country. So what you seek in the country is private investment. For that, towards that, I don't know how much, I don't have the arithmetic now ready for it. When you tweak the income tax between 5 lakhs to 15 lakhs, with whatever, there is a underlying message also that, I mean, there are options available. I'm not commenting on that.
You can do one or the other,
If it is going to be really good, the chaps, the people who are at this particular level are the people who have, age bracket of maybe 25 to 35. They are the people who will be buying a smaller house, a white goods, or maybe automobile. So, if 1,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees.
I just want to say a little thing about automobiles and the youngsters. They don't watch automobile show now. Say, why should I buy a car? I've got Uber. World is changing.
I would say that I'm also for a change, but Prannoy, it's not going to be overnight change. So I'm talking about other way they can spend for other things also. 1,000 to 5,000 bucks in the pocket of somebody like who's paying EMI can make a hell of a lot of difference. So when we are clamoring for that, let there be more money in the hands of the consumer, there is a move towards that. So we need to appreciate some of the good things. Similarly, she mentioned about startup. So considering a startup also to have a 100 crore top line, which I've seen in many of the brick and mortar side, not the IT oriented one. 100 is a fairly decent number in the initial 4 to 5 years to reach there. So encouragement is given on that. So